Hello and welcome. Welcome to the Authentic Freedom Virtual Church. My name is Lori Lumby and I'm the spiritual director and pastor of this online virtual community. I would like to take a moment and read to you today from our mission statement. We are a community of men and women who consider Jesus to be our teacher while honoring the spiritual truths inherent within all sacred traditions. We recognize the divine as that which is at once inside of us, outside of us, and present within all of creation, and which can be acknowledged by any name, image, or presence. We believe in the inherent potential of all human beings to become self-actualized and acknowledge the spiritual journey as a formative tool in this endeavor. We believe in the law of love and seek to know more fully the love of the divine that dwells within us, which seeks to be known in the world through us in service to the betterment of the world. Thank you for joining us today, and let us pause for a moment in silence to gather our attention, our intention, and our purpose for being here today, and to open our minds and our hearts to receive God's nourishment for us today. Avundeva Shemaya, Avundeva Shemaya, Avundeva Shemaya, Avundeva Shemaya. Allah, Allah, Elohim Elad. Allah, Allah, Elohim Elad. Allah, Allah, Elohim Elad. Allah, Allah, Elohim Elad. Avundeva Shemaya, Avundeva Shemaya. O thou from whom the breath of life flows and is present in all forms of vibration and light. I share that as our opening song today because, quite frankly, this week's readings have really troubled me, and along with last week's readings as well. As such, I've really struggled with how to speak to these readings. And the reason that I struggle with these readings is in relation to our mission statement, to the Authentic Freedom Virtual Church, and in relation to the song that I just sang. Because both of those readings, the reading from last week's Gospel, John 3:16, and this week's reading on Jesus as the bread of life, these readings are troubling to me. Not because of what they say, but again, because of how they have been presented and interpreted in a way that sometimes affords Christianity some sort of privilege by saying that the only way to salvation is through Jesus, and specifically through Christianity, or even more specifically through specific Christian denominations. These weeks are troubling to me because instead of creating love and harmony in the way that Jesus intended, they are sometimes presented in a way that creates separation. And I think that in this day and age, I find this perspective to be short-sighted and lacking in compassion. How do we, in this day and age, say to our Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, Jewish, pagan, Native American, or even atheist friends, how do we look them in the eye and say to them, well, you're not going to heaven, or you can't have salvation because you don't believe in Jesus? Quite frankly, I find this to be an insult. And fortunately, the Vatican II fathers also understood that perhaps there's a more expansive way of looking at the topic of salvation. And they began to ask the question of how can we understand salvation in the context of all religions? How can we understand perhaps the preference that we have towards Christianity, but also leaving room for the salvation of others? How can we comprehend and understand that? And more importantly, or I guess more directly for this week's reading, how can we understand this week's reading in the context of that question? I really sat in prayer around this, not knowing how to respond to this week's reading that talks about Jesus as the bread of life and seems to be saying that it is only through receiving the bread of life, through Jesus, that one can find salvation. As I sat with this, what surfaced for me was a truth about human nature. As human beings, we get bored, and as religions, we become complacent. This is what happened in first century Palestine. And this is the context in which Christianity arose. The religious officials, as it is portrayed in Scripture, seemed to be resting on the laurels of their authority, expecting their followers to be content in doing what they were told, and presenting the path of salvation as the fulfillment of the 3,756 laws of the Torah. And if people would just follow those laws, just do what they're told, then they would receive their heavenly reward. While that worked for some believers, it clearly did not work for all. For those who were not getting their needs met from within the temple, or in adherence to doctrine, or for whom the doctrine was no longer relevant, they went searching. They were not content within the complacency of the institution. They were not content in simply doing what they were told. Instead, there was a longing in their heart that urged them to search for something more. They were not getting their needs met within the traditional practices of Judaism, and so they went searching. And what they found was Jesus. Jesus came along not to start a new religion, but to breathe new life into the faith that he loved. And the people who found Jesus and stayed with him found nourishment, peace, compassion, joy, and love in the words that he taught them and in the way that he ministered to them, specifically offering each and every person unconditional love and an overflowing outpouring of compassion. Jesus met people where they were at. He took the time to listen to their deeper need, their need to be nourished, their need to know God, their need to find meaning and fulfillment in their life, their need simply to be fed or clothed, or to be healed of the sicknesses both within and outside that plagued them. Jesus took the time to listen and to meet people where they were at. He did not hold the law up as follow these steps and you'll be saved. Instead, he said, come here. Let me tell you about the God that I know. And in knowing the God that I know, who is love and compassion and forgiveness and peace, this is where you will find salvation in this life. Come to know the God that I know, the God that is the God of Judaism, and a God that is bigger than that. A God that cannot be contained by the structures of a specific religious tradition or practice. Come and know the God that I know, that is love. Period. And those that came to know Jesus and to understand his teachings and who embodied these teachings and found ways to live them out, they were excited about what they were receiving, and they were anxious to share it with others. And so they did. And we see this in the beginning stories of the Christian scripture. In the Acts of the Apostles and at the end of many of the Gospels, we see and hear of the apostles sharing their enthusiasm for what they learned and experienced with Jesus. And we see this in John's Gospel. John's Gospel was written somewhere between 70 and 100 in the Common Era, which means that the author had many years to reflect on their own personal experience with Jesus, or on the teachings and the experiences that others had that they relayed to this author. And it is this enthusiasm that is being poured forth out of John's Gospel, which in fact makes it one of my favorite. In addition to that, we need to understand the context in which the Gospel of John was written. The Gospel of John was written after the fall of the temple in Jerusalem. It was also written after the followers of Jesus had been expelled from the temple grounds. And so those that found this enthusiasm in Jesus first began to express it within the context of their Hebrew faith. But when they were expelled from the temple, then it became a faith of its own, or a practice or a religion of its own. And this is what's normally the case. And when one is expelled out of what they know to start something new, the response, the way that they present their experience, often becomes over and against the thing out of which they arose. So for the Johannine community, for example, they were defending their Christian faith over and against the faith out of which it arose, which was Judaism. And this approach or this attitude is often referred to as apologetics. I'm defending the faith that I know. And sometimes in that defense, our human nature compels us then to condemn anything that is not of that particular faith. Does this sound familiar? A question that I have is, how many friends and family members do you know who left the faith of their youth and discovered new forms, perhaps of Christianity? Maybe they discovered Buddhism, a pagan tradition, or Hindu practices. Maybe they were drawn to Native American practices. They left the faith that they knew because it was not life-giving to them. It was no longer relevant. More importantly, they were not being fed. They left the faith that they knew and found something that did give them nourishment, did give them support. And now they think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. This is how it is with human beings. And this is how it was for the first century Christians. Expelled from the faith that they had known, or discontented with the faith that they had known, and discovering something new that filled them with enthusiasm and excitement, but perhaps also compelled them to set their new beliefs apart as better than, or more critical than, or more necessary than the faith in which they grew up. Religions become complacent, and human beings get bored. As such, I would like us to invite this approach to the past 2 weeks' readings and to take a look at them from another perspective. Not as a way to afford Christianity some sort of special privilege, or to present Jesus as the only means of salvation, but instead to take this time to really look within. To look within at our own experience of faith, of religion, of beliefs, of practice, of spirituality. And I want us to take a look within, first from the perspective of an individual, and secondly, from the perspective of church. As individuals, I invite us to ask the question, how have we been bored? Where have we lost interest in the faith of our youth? What needs have and have not been met by our church? How have we communicated this boredom and dissatisfaction with the church? How have we asked more clearly, more fully, for our needs to be met? How are we exploring and engaging in practices that have helped us to get these needs met, whether these practices are within or outside of the church that we grew up in? As a church, I invite us to reflect, where have we become complacent? Where are we content in believing that people are satisfied in simply doing what they're told? Where have we failed to ask people what they really need? And where have we failed in helping them to get those needs met? Where have we been too busy talking and preaching and teaching rules and doctrine to sit down and really listen to what people need, to the yearning of their heart, to the desires of their soul? Most pointedly, my challenge this week is to the church. Your people are starving. Your people are starving. And if you are not going to feed them, they will find nourishment and support elsewhere. And they already are, in droves. When the second largest denomination in the United States is made up of non-practicing and recovering Catholics, we have to take a look in the mirror. It's time to lay down the banner of Christian privilege and listen to the needs of the people and give them what they need. People are starving. They are starving for the love of God. They are starving to feel accepted and loved. They are starving for meaning and purpose and intimate connection in their life. This is what people are looking for. And these are the needs that Jesus responded to. And Jesus responded to these needs with the only food that he had to offer, the food of unconditional love and the overflowing cup of compassion. How are we following Jesus' model in giving people what they really need? Thank you for joining us this week. And again, if you found this service to be meaningful and supportive of your own journey, I invite you to share it with others through your social media network. And I also invite you to make a donation to Authentic Freedom Ministries to support the continued ministry that we offer of this online service and the weekly meditation newsletter, the blog, and other services that we provide on a sliding scale so that all may get their needs met. Thank you.